The world had already ended for humanity long before the Galactic Council knew we existed. Centuries of environmental decay, famine, and endless wars had ravaged Earth beyond recognition. Oceans boiled, cities became graves, and the sky itself seemed to hang heavy with ash. For generations, survival became a brutal game, where the weak were consumed by the relentless, grinding machine of human evolution. There were no civilians anymore. From the moment of birth, every child was molded for one purpose: to endure, to fight, and to kill if necessary. Humanity had become a war machine in every sense, its technology honed not for exploration or enlightenment, but for destruction. The once fragile concept of peace had been buried beneath the weight of a species driven to the edge of extinction. When the Galactic Council found Earth, it wasn't hope that humanity saw in the stars, it was another threat. The Council, a sprawling coalition of alien species united in the pursuit of interstellar peace, looked at Earth and saw a primitive, battered world. They viewed us as lesser beings, fractured and barbaric. We were a relic of a past they had long left behind, something to be managed, brought into line, or discarded. They arrived in great ships, gleaming symbols of an advanced civilization, offering diplomacy wrapped in thinly veiled condescension. The Council proposed unity under their rule, the integration of humanity into a galaxy that no longer knew war, hunger, or desperation. But unity came at a cost: submission. They demanded we dismantle what we had become. They asked for control over our weapons, our leaders, our very existence. For a species forged in fire and conflict, submission was death. The Council's peace was a peace we could not afford, a peace that would strip away the only thing we had left: our will to fight. Diplomacy crumbled quickly, their demands met with cold silence and thinly veiled contempt. The Council, mistaking our refusal for the ignorance of a lesser race, believed they could force us to bend. They underestimated what humanity had become. When the Council declared war, they thought it would be a swift campaign, a simple show of force. They spoke of bringing us into compliance, of breaking us until we fit their mold. But humanity had already been broken, over and over again. We had nothing left to lose. We didn't declare war in return. We declared something far worse. There was no grand speech, no pomp or ceremony. The message from Earth's leaders was simple, transmitted across the stars without hesitation: if you come for us, we will end you. We had spent centuries evolving into something the galaxy had never seen. Every life was a weapon. Every breath was drawn with the knowledge that survival was never guaranteed. And now, that same ruthless, unforgiving force was turned outward. The Galactic Council had awakened something they couldn't comprehend, something that had clawed its way back from the brink of extinction countless times. They saw us as primitive, unaware that we had honed ourselves into the perfect instruments of war. There would be no mercy, no surrender, no negotiation. For the first time in centuries, humanity had a singular, unified purpose again. And that purpose was annihilation. The stars themselves seemed to dim as Earth readied for war, not out of fear or uncertainty, but out of a grim, unshakable resolve. The Council had offered peace at the cost of submission. They were about to learn that there were things far worse than war. The Council had believed humanity's threats were hollow, the bluster of a desperate race trying to shield itself from inevitable defeat. They were wrong. Humanity had been preparing for war long before the Council ever made contact. While Earth crumbled beneath environmental collapse and unending strife, humanity's greatest minds turned their focus to survival by any means necessary. In the shadows, a war machine was built, one born from centuries of desperation, fueled by a singular drive, to never again be at the mercy of forces beyond their control. The Council's initial intelligence was laughably outdated. They saw the ruins of Earth and assumed the people who lived there had been crippled by their past mistakes. But while the planet withered, humanity evolved, harvesting the remnants of alien tech from old, forgotten skirmishes, combining it with their own advancements. They built weapons designed not just to defend, but to obliterate. Whole colonies could be reduced to ash in seconds with precision-guided missiles, carrying payloads capable of leveling entire worlds. Ships powered by engines reverse-engineered from alien wreckage now outpaced even the Council's finest fleets. cybernetically enhanced soldiers, half machine and bred for war, became living weapons. When humanity struck, it wasn't with hesitation or diplomacy, it was with the full, unrelenting force of a species that had mastered the art of destruction. The first target was an outlying colony, a strategic choice. The Council had thought it safe, believing humanity to be incapable of such coordinated, large-scale operations. In a single, precise wave, the colony was erased from existence. The devastation was so complete that not even a single distress signal escaped. The Council's forces had been stationed there as a precaution, but they were not prepared for what came next. The sky tore open as human warships descended, raining fire and destruction. It wasn't a battle, it was a slaughter. Buildings collapsed under the weight of orbital bombardments, and entire swathes of land were reduced to smoking craters. Humanity didn't waste time with threats or ultimatums. They struck to kill, and they did so with a terrifying efficiency. Among the chaos, one alien officer, tasked with overseeing the Council's defense, bore witness to the horrors unfolding. Through his eyes, the reality of humanity's tactics came into sharp focus. The humans were relentless. They didn't give time for surrender or negotiation. They didn't aim to control or subdue, they sought complete annihilation. Council forces, trained in the art of precision strikes and defensive formations, were torn apart like paper before a hurricane. The humans moved like predators, hunting with cold precision, every move designed to maximize destruction. It was warfare beyond anything the galaxy had seen for millennia. The officer could hardly comprehend the scale of the attack. It was as though humanity had no limit to its capacity for violence, as if they had perfected war in ways the Council had never thought possible. For centuries, the Council had preached peace and control, assuming that no species would willingly destroy themselves in pursuit of victory. But humanity wasn't afraid of destruction, they had embraced it. The officer's last moments were spent watching the destruction of his command center, realizing that the enemy they faced was not a broken remnant of a primitive world, but a force that had evolved to wage total war without hesitation or remorse. In the heart of the Council's command, the reaction was one of disbelief. How had this happened? How had a species they considered beneath notice unleashed such devastation? Reports of the attack flooded in, each one worse than the last. The Council's high command had grown complacent, certain that their dominance in the galaxy was unshakable. They had never considered the possibility that humanity could outmaneuver them, outfight them, or strike with such overwhelming brutality. Now, they were paying the price for their arrogance. The Council convened in emergency sessions, scrambling to make sense of what had just transpired. Their fleets were vast, their technology superior, or so they had thought. But now, the truth became clear. They had vastly underestimated their enemy. The humans had no interest in conventional warfare or the measured tactics the Council had long perfected. They didn't want control over territory or resources. They didn't want to negotiate for peace. They wanted their enemies wiped from existence. Panic rippled through the ranks. The Council had assumed they were dealing with a primitive species on the verge of collapse, but instead, they were facing something far more dangerous. A species that had nothing left to lose. The decision to declare war now felt like a catastrophic mistake, but it was too late to turn back. Humanity had shown its true face, and that face was one of unyielding ruthlessness. Mobilization efforts began in earnest, but there was an undercurrent of dread. For the first time in countless centuries, the Council's forces were forced to confront the possibility that they could lose. Every move they made now felt reactionary, desperate. They were playing catch-up in a war they didn't fully understand, against an enemy that had no intention of playing by their rules. As more Council ships were deployed to reinforce their defenses, the realization began to sink in. They were fighting a war against a species that had evolved beyond their comprehension, a species that had been tempered by centuries of hardship and conflict. This was not the humanity the Council had expected. This was a war machine, cold, efficient, and utterly without mercy. And it had been unleashed. By the early 22nd century, Earth was a graveyard. Global warming had turned once thriving ecosystems into wastelands. Famine spread like wildfire across continents, and governments, weakened by years of economic turmoil and political strife, began to collapse one after another. The social fabric of humanity tore apart at the seams, leaving behind a chaotic world on the brink of total collapse. Nations dissolved into war zones, fighting for dwindling resources. The concept of peace, once a noble ideal, became a distant memory. Survival was all that remained. In this chaos, the old world died, and something new began to emerge. With traditional leadership unable to hold societies together, power shifted to those who could offer protection and stability, militaristic factions, hardened by the battles of survival. These new leaders offered strength, but at a steep cost. The weak were culled, unable to contribute to the new order. Those who survived learned to embrace war as a way of life. It was no longer just a means to an end, it was the end itself. Strength, power, and ruthlessness became the highest virtues. Anything else was a death sentence. From birth, children were molded into soldiers, taught that compassion was weakness and hesitation meant death. As cities crumbled, fortresses were built. Human society didn't just endure the chaos, it thrived in it. The strongest factions rose to dominate the ruins of what had once been civilization. A culture of war, not of peace, defined humanity's future. Every advance, every decision was driven by the need to survive, and in this harsh new world, survival was only guaranteed through strength. In the midst of this brutal transformation, technology advanced at a breakneck pace. Desperation pushed humanity to innovate like never before. Artificial intelligence, once feared as a threat, was harnessed and integrated into the battlefield, guiding tactics, optimizing logistics, and analyzing enemies with chilling precision. Cybernetic enhancements turned soldiers into something more than human, melding flesh with machine to create warriors who felt no pain, no fear, and no hesitation. Genetic modifications further honed the human body, pushing it beyond its natural limits. No longer was evolution a slow, natural process, it became a tool to be wielded, manipulated to create the perfect soldiers, the ultimate survivors. These advancements came at a moral cost. The debates of old, about ethics, about human rights, were swept aside in the face of a far greater imperative: survival. The question was no longer whether certain actions were right or wrong, the only question that mattered was whether they would keep humanity alive. And so, human leaders, hardened by the collapse of civilization, embraced these changes. They made the decision that would define their species for centuries to come. Mercy, diplomacy, compromise, these were luxuries they could no longer afford. The time for talk was over. In the corridors of what remained of Earth's leadership, a grim calculus began to take shape. They looked at the stars and knew that humanity could not afford to be passive. The galaxy was full of unknown threats, and the lesson Earth had taught them was simple: any weakness would be exploited. In the face of potential annihilation, there could be no hesitation. Survival came first, no matter the cost. Leaders faced the harsh reality that annihilation was not just an option, it was the only path forward. They could not risk alien species gaining the upper hand. If humanity was to survive, it had to strike first, and strike decisively. They wouldn't just defend themselves, they would obliterate anything that posed a threat to their existence. This was not a decision made lightly, but it was one that humanity accepted as necessary. Diplomacy, peace treaties, alliances, these were relics of a world that no longer existed. The leaders saw them for what they were: vulnerabilities. The new order was clear. You either crushed your enemies or became their prey. Humanity had learned that the universe was not a place for idealists. It was for those willing to do whatever it took to endure. The Galactic Council, with its high-minded ideals of peace, represented a threat to this new doctrine. The Council's belief in interstellar harmony and peaceful coexistence ran counter to everything humanity had become. Submission to their laws would mean dismantling the war machine that had kept humanity alive. And for humanity, survival at the cost of submission was no survival at all. Earth's leaders knew that if the Council truly understood what humanity had become, they would never tolerate such a species in the galaxy. War was inevitable. Humanity had evolved beyond morality, beyond compassion. It had become something colder, something driven by a primal need to survive. And when faced with the prospect of alien interference, the choice was clear. There could be no half measures, no middle ground. Any threat to their survival had to be wiped out completely. Thus, the decision was made. Humanity would face the stars, not as diplomats or explorers, but as conquerors, as predators. If the Council or any other species thought they could force humanity into submission, they would be met with extinction. The survival of their own species came at the cost of countless others, but to humanity, that was no choice at all. The universe would learn the same lesson the Earth had taught humanity: only the strongest survive. As humanity's leaders looked to the stars, they knew they had embraced a path that would forever change the galaxy. Their past was full of scars, their future uncertain, but they had made their decision. There was no room for regret, no time for second thoughts. The only way forward was to eliminate any and all threats. Humanity, having evolved into something far beyond what it once was, would not be stopped. Survival was all that mattered, and they would ensure it, whatever the cost. The Council's response was swift, but it was tragically misguided. Their fleets mobilized in haste, a massive counteroffensive aimed at reclaiming control over the situation. Their ships were sleek, elegant constructs of centuries of interstellar peacekeeping, designed for deterrence, not outright destruction. They approached humanity's war machine with confidence, relying on outdated strategies, based on the assumption that humanity was still the primitive species they had first encountered. That assumption, however, was their fatal flaw. Each engagement was a disaster. The Council's forces moved with precision, but against humanity's brutal efficiency, they were outmatched at every turn. For every ship the Council deployed, humanity had two more waiting, loaded with missiles designed not just to destroy but to obliterate entire planetary surfaces. Cybernetic soldiers, impervious to pain and relentless in their assault, tore through alien defenses with terrifying ease. Planets fell before the Council could mount any significant defense. Each battle ended in catastrophic losses for the Council, their fleets decimated by human technology they hadn't imagined possible. In the Council's chambers, panic began to set in. The alien species that once sat around the table with an air of superiority now found themselves consumed by fear. Once they had considered themselves the galaxy's moral guardians, protectors of order and peace. Now, they faced annihilation at the hands of a species they had underestimated and provoked. Tensions boiled over. Some factions, their confidence shattered, began calling for peace, suggesting they negotiate a ceasefire while they still had the chance. Others, consumed by fear, argued for total war. Humanity had to be exterminated before it spread any further, before its savage tactics consumed the galaxy. But even as these debates raged, humanity had already begun a new form of warfare. Where the Council still clung to conventional battles, humanity turned to psychological warfare with the same ruthlessness they had applied on the battlefield. They hijacked the Council's communication networks, broadcasting footage of their conquest across entire star systems. Images of obliterated alien cities and annihilated colonies played on every screen. The message was clear: humanity did not seek peace or negotiations. They sought only one thing: the complete destruction of anyone who stood in their way. The broadcasts were relentless. Civilians on alien worlds, once protected by the supposed invincibility of the Council's fleets, were now faced with the stark reality that their governments could not protect them. Fear spread like a contagion. Riots broke out in major cities as civilians began to lose faith in their leaders. Society, once orderly and peaceful, descended into chaos. Panic gripped entire planets. Crowds stormed government buildings, demanding answers, but there were none to give. The Council's high command had no plan, no defense against the sheer brutality of humanity's onslaught. The Council's desperation deepened. Each passing day, the situation grew worse. Entire fleets had been reduced to wreckage, and their colonies lay in ruins. Communications between Council planets grew increasingly fragmented as chaos spread. Factions within the Council turned on one another, blaming each other for the failures that had brought them to this moment. Some species, fearing their own extinction, began secretly negotiating with humanity, hoping to save themselves at the expense of their former allies. Meanwhile, humanity prepared for its final strike. The time for dismantling the Council piece by piece was over. Now they would deliver the blow that would end the war once and for all. Human leaders, cold and calculating, planned an attack that would cripple the heart of the Galactic Council. Every resource, every weapon was focused on one objective: total annihilation of the Council's core worlds. There would be no mercy, no quarter given. For the Council, hope was a flickering ember, barely alive. Their once mighty armada was shattered, their cities in chaos, their people gripped by fear. They had seen what humanity could do, and now they understood the true meaning of war. In their arrogance, they had provoked a species that had no interest in peace, and now they faced the consequences. No strategy, no amount of diplomacy could save them now. Their defeat was not just imminent, it was inevitable. Fear and desperation ruled the galaxy. What had once been a beacon of peace and stability was now crumbling under the weight of its own failures. The Council, once so sure of their control, now realized they had unleashed a force they could never hope to contain. As humanity's final offensive drew closer, the Council's last remaining leaders watched helplessly, knowing that the end was near. The galaxy, once united under the Council's order, was falling apart. The final attack came without warning, swift and devastating. Humanity had marshaled all of its forces for this moment, and now the culmination of their brutal evolution was unleashed upon the heart of the Galactic Council. Their fleets, relentless and remorseless, tore through the defenses of the core worlds like they were nothing more than paper. Shields crumbled, planets burned, and cities fell silent under the barrage of humanity's assault. There was no hesitation, no mercy. This was not just a military campaign, it was extermination. Entire species were wiped out in a matter of hours, erased from existence without a second thought. The Council's central command, the heart of its governance and authority, was obliterated in the opening strikes. No one was spared. From the vantage point of a high-ranking Council member, the horror unfolded with agonizing clarity. They watched in disbelief as the very fabric of their civilization was torn apart, piece by piece. The technology they had believed would protect them, the alliances they thought would ensure their dominance, all of it was worthless now. The realization crept in slowly, like a cold tide: humanity didn't seek peace. They didn't want negotiations, treaties, or even victory in the traditional sense. They wanted only one thing: absolute, unquestionable security. And they would achieve that by ensuring that no one could ever rise against them again. The high-ranking officials' mind raced as they watched their people flee, their cities crumble, their ships fall from the sky in flames. This was not war. It was annihilation on a scale they had never imagined. Everything they had worked to build, every species that had once flourished under the banner of the Galactic Council, was gone. The Council had been so sure of its place in the galaxy, so certain of its power. But now, as the last remnants of their defenses were snuffed out, they understood the truth: they had underestimated humanity, and now they were paying the ultimate price. There would be no recovery, no rebuilding. This was the end. In the aftermath, humanity stood victorious. The galaxy was theirs, unchallenged, uncontested. But as the smoke cleared, the reality of what they had done began to settle in. Entire species, cultures, and histories had been obliterated, wiped from existence in the span of hours. The stars were silent now, their light dimmed by the echoes of destruction. Humanity had secured its survival, but at what cost? They had become the very thing they once feared, a force so powerful, so ruthless, that it would stop at nothing to ensure its own dominance. There was no celebration, no triumph in the streets. Victory had come, but it felt hollow, empty. The leaders of humanity looked out at the galaxy they had conquered and saw not a future of prosperity, but a wasteland of destruction. The species that had once populated the stars were gone, leaving only the humans to chart a course forward. They had won, yes, but the price had been staggering. The question lingered in the air: was survival truly worth the annihilation of so much life? As the days passed, the weight of their actions began to press down on humanity. They were the rulers of the galaxy now, but it was a galaxy scarred by their ruthlessness. They had proven their strength, but in doing so, they had lost something vital: their humanity. The leaders who had once been driven by a desire to protect their people now found themselves staring into the abyss they had created. There was no one left to challenge them, but there was also no one left to share the stars with. The future stretched out before them, vast and empty. They had survived, but the cost had been unimaginable. What would they become now? Would they rebuild, creating a new order in the galaxy, or would they simply fall deeper into the cycle of destruction they had unleashed? The final question lingered: was survival at any price truly worth it, if it meant the death of everything else? Victory had come, but it left behind only silence.